And so it is the Pisces season, which means it would be rude not to talk about Saturn in Pisces. But before I do, I want to wish every single one of you who has that natal placement happy Saturn return. Whether it's your first Saturn return, second Saturn return, or even third. In which case, please let me know below in the comments how you're doing, what's happening, how you're finding it. And I wish you, and I know you might not feel at the time, but please trust me, not because I'm an astrology crone, but because I am old and I'm approaching my second, but I had an intense first Saturn return. And I had a few other people in my life, obviously, since. And it does, when you're in it is like being in a vice. But it's like diamonds are shaped by extreme pressure, right? I think. Or they're certainly, yeah, I think let's not spoil this lovely metaphor. I'm pretty sure that's correct. So the pressure is there, and I'm sure you're feeling it. In fact, I know a couple of people who are actually going through this right now, friends. And one of them in particularly beautifully eloquent style was expressing it in those terms. And you cannot not feel the pressure, but Saturn is the most generous, the most giving archetype. And why I think it's it, I don't know. It's a yin sign, Capricorn, but Saturn is archetypally and mythologically really a male figure. So if I confuse the he and she and it and whatever, just go with me. Because it's the form, it's the ultimate expression of form. And so when it gives you something, you can really feel it, you can really know it, you can really hold it, and it can last like nothing else lasts. Well, except for Neptune, which lasts forever and ever, infinitely. But with Neptune and therefore Pisces, we don't have that gratifying sense of actually holding it and feeling it physically. So that's why I claim that Saturn is the most generous archetype, in the sense that it really it really honors our 3D body incarnated existence, human soul into the body, right? So, but as you can probably see already in my language, the stark difference between Saturn, as I just described it, like a physical matter, it's the ultimate. It's like neither Taurus nor Virgo are that. This is calcified. This is solid. This is even though it's a cardinal sign, it's, if you need to think of it as how, the stages we take to get to Saturn or Capricorn, right? And it's those stages, the compounding effect of step after step after step of doing something, building something, creating something, that creates that density, right? So you have that as a Saturn, and then you have Pisces and or Neptune, which are, they're overlapping, they're almost identical, although that's a whole separate video about, subtle difference between house signs and house sign and planet. House sign and planet. So if I'm interchangeably using these words here, Neptune, Pisces, and 12th house even, I am still talking about the themes of Saturn in Pisces, so just bear that in mind. But yeah, so Pisces is everything but. Pisces is where everything just goes up in the smoke. It loses its substance, physical substance. It envelops us with a sensation that it's undescribable. The moment we're trying to translate and put words, Mercury, Virgo, right? So we're in Pisces. As the moment we try to put words and bring Virgo into it, we lose some of Pisces. Which is why the Saturn in Pisces is, if you ask me, I like to call that, I'm not sure other astrologers have heard them, in fact, many, is the archetype of the poet. And or the artist, it can be the artist as well. But I love the idea of poet because it's words. And not just because Virgo is the opposite end of it, but because we as humans use language, i.e. words, and logic. And we have used this and have been conditioned to rely on the mind and the logic and the brain, right? almost exclusively to the detriment or to the exclusion of all the other faculties of ours, like body, sensations, intuition, emotion, and all that. Nowadays, obviously, 21st century, we are eroding that old paradigm, old way of being. But the old way of being, it's not just few years or even a few hundred years. I think it's, well, no, it is few hundred years. No, I don't think it's a millennia. Let's say a few hundred years, few centuries, that we have been conditioned to use our brain, and therefore, like, we make sense of the world with words. So what happens when we enter the world of Pisces and all of a sudden those words fall short of the meaning that we recognize? We get disoriented, we get confused, we get scared, we feel lost, until the moment we realize, and this is the Saturn piece. So what I'm portraying here, what I'm depicting, is essentially why I think, and I'm jealous of all of you with Saturn in Pisces, absolutely adore it. I think Saturn in Pisces is the most glorious Saturn you can have. I just think it's just the most glorious Saturn in the world, because it's like the wisest Saturn. It's the Saturn that gets, the only archetype, the only planet, if you ask me, that actually gets Neptune. because Saturn gets whatever it touches, and by get I mean grabs and goes, okay, that's what it is, that's that thing, the planet that is just transited by conjunction, square, opposition, and I always use those more intense and challenging ones, because with them you have no mistake that what's happening, it's happening, right? And so Saturn is gets Neptune by sheer default of Saturn, and its function to whatever it comes into contact with gives it form, because itself is a form, and the moment it comes, itself is an archetype. It's not literally a form, but that's what I mean. Its function is to give form. So it comes into contact with Neptune, or rather, Pisces, or both, and it will be in 2026. It will come together with Neptune, like the 0-degree Aries exact conjunction, but it will be dancing close to each other. They will be conjunct in Pisces as well, not exactly, but so, and being in the same sign, it's like, I consider that in effect a conjunction. And so with Saturn in Pisces, we have this rare, not once in a lifetime, but one every 30 years, let's say, give or take 28 to 30 years, opportunity to get really physical with Pisces, which is rare. That's what I mean. Without Saturn, we can't do that. And it's the most magical of realms. And I don't mean just magic as in ritualistic influencing and engagement with entities and energies and cosmos and all that. That too. But I just mean like all that world that's beyond form, right? Once in those 30 years, we get a chance with Saturn, the only time that world is as close to form as it can get, i.e. the poet, right? So back to the poet. So if you're Saturn in Pisces, I hope this will give you some consolation, some comfort to know that your experience is like an experience of a poet writing a poem. So I'm not a poet in the sense I don't have a whole collection of poems. I have a few. But I write, I'm creative and do all kinds of arty stuff. And amongst other things, I do write poems occasionally. But I know what it's like. And I'm sure you do too. If you're Saturn in Pisces in some way or another, you know the process of creation when you're trying to give form to an idea, to an abstract. And so, as but like I stick with the poet archetype, think of a poem. So, but also think of the process if you can. So the process is like you have this feeling, you have this sense of what it is that you want to communicate, what it is that you want to give form to in words. But because that thing that you want to give form to, it's so complex and so otherworldly and so beyond logic and words, in a way so undescribable, unpalatable, ineffable, like, what's the word when you couldn't understand it, certainly not with logic faculty and all that. But you one thing you can do with Pisces, Neptune, and that world of beyond form is you can feel it, you can sense it, but you fall short with words, like I say. But what the poet does is then uses the language of form, which is form, right? Language is form. Words have meaning, and that word has a form, and in the sound, but also in the actual physical look and all that. Anyway, letters. But what it cannot do is be literal, right? But it has to, because that would just kill that form, that vision, let's call it, that sensation, that feeling that he wants to convey. So it's playing with, and this is the beauty. It's frustrating. I know it's frustrating, but it's also, you cannot help. So to all of you, Saturn in Pisces, and to all of us who resonate with this in your life in some way or form, particularly since Saturn has been in Pisces, with this sense that, something's just outside of your grasp, but as you are engaging with it and working out how you can bring it into your grasp more by like being, think of a poem, the way it looks at the end, like it's kind of nonsensical often, but if you think about it and if you really let yourself like absorb the poem with visually as well as meaning wise, as well as a rhythm, language, sound, all of it, like you get the sense. Now, whether it's exactly the same as the poet meant, that's again a different video. But so as someone on the receiving end of the beauty of a poem, how beautiful Saturn in Pisces is. That's your experience of Saturn in Pisces. But as a maker of it, as a native of Saturn in Pisces, like I say, it can be frustrating, but there is a sense of tending to something. Put it this way: if you had to work on a bicycle that broke, and you kind of you're in the middle of something, going somewhere, and now you have to, something broke, and you have to fix it, and and that's frustrating. You haven't got the parts or whatever. You have some kind of difficulty with it. That frustration is one kind of frustration. But here, the frustration is like you're dealing with something beautiful, so beautiful, like that sense, that vision that you had, that feeling, that experience that you want to convey. And yes, the inability to so easily and effortlessly give it words and make it into a form is frustrating, like I say. But because you're dealing with the beautiful thing that hasn't become a thing maybe yet, the frustration is nothing like that. Yeah, do you see what I mean? So I know that frustration, but it's almost like a sacred frustration, right? And it feels like you're dealing with something so important that frustration is important too, and it's not in a way to kind of keep at it and not come out of it, but just like it's part of the process. So it's almost like you can't get angry with that frustration. So to you Saturn in Pisces people, and to, like I say, all of us, this is one kind of aspect I'm describing for Saturn in Pisces transit and placement. Just remember that the struggles you are having with making sense and incarnating, realizing either self, depending where your Saturn is, or certainly that part of the self, wherever your Saturn is a part of you, right? So if you're struggling to realize it in sort of tangible ways, in ways that majority can understand, or even in ways that your neighbor, your family member, your loved one can understand, is futile, and you know it. But that is not the point. The point is that meaning to achieve that recognition and understanding even is potentially hard to come by. But if you can remember that the Pisces piece, so the Saturn wants control, so it's like I have created a poem or I have created the artwork and I want the world to understand what it is. But the Pisces goes, no, this is just an interpretation. This is just your take on it. So when you stand in front of an artwork or reading a poem, another person, your poem, your artwork will feel something and it will be brought to tears. It will be laughing, because it's funny or something, right? But it might not be exactly the joke that you had in mind or the beauty that you had in mind that brought them to tears if there was a way of comparing them. And so the Pisces piece of your Saturn in Pisces says, let go of that, of what the others, how the others are going to receive you. As long as they're moved in some way, that's life force and spirit, maybe even we can call it, since it's Pisces, which is a form of life, the ultimate form of life, has moved through that work to them. So the connection has been made, and that's your job done. In every sense of your life, in every part of your life, whether it's like your art or just the way you communicate, the way you have relationships, and it isn't in a way a lonely existence. So I'll get to that in a moment. Let me see. Okay. I always trying to go beyond 30 minutes, but I want to touch on a couple of other themes of Saturn in Pisces. But here is a good point to kind of switch up a gear maybe, which is that sense of loneliness. And so, which is again why I adore Saturn in Pisces. It knows the truth. And this could be Saturn in 12th house, although it would be very much flavored by the sign and whatever conjunctions you have. But Saturn in Pisces is very much, you would resonate with what I'm saying. Capricorn in 12th house, similar. If you have no planets, maybe less so. If you have planets, more so. And obviously then, Saturn in Pisces. And so this loneliness is on existential level that Saturn in Pisces feels. Because it knows... Okay, I'm going to sort of step back, just to give you a different angle of how to approach Saturn and Pisces, to understand the dynamic between the two, between Saturn and Pisces as archetypes. And I'm going to talk about Neptune here. And I'm not going to go into the depth, since partly I don't know the depth of it, but just info so you can Google further if you're interested. But there is a famous psychiatrist, Stanislav Grof, that's like early 20th century, I think. No, maybe mid. Anyway, not sure the time, it doesn't matter. It's not that old is what I mean. It's last century the most. He came up with this model of working with people through breath work and semi-hypnosis or something, I'm not sure, to get them to relive and therefore work through and release. I think that's my window cleaner. Hello. To release all the kind of stuff that they have, energies, they have collected from pre-birth, like from past lives and all that have been activated through the process of birth. And then Richard Tarnas, in collaboration with him, has kind of allocated, if you like, the archetypes, when it comes astrological archetypes that represent there are 4 stages of this birth process, literal and metaphorical. And so the first stage of birth, literally speaking, but through an archetype, is Neptune, because we are in this amniotic fluid of blissful unawareness of the world outside of us, except for mother's womb, full of warmth and comfort and nourishment and love, and we feel so safe, and it's just heaven, literally Eden, right? Neptune, connected to the universe, energetically, and through through that fluid and all that stuff, right? The sense of unity. And then comes the contractions, and the birth begins. And the birth is, that second phase is Saturn. And in that moment, as the contractions happen, the baby is pushed out of, unapologetically, harshly, there's even a better word, it's not coming to me, out of this heaven, of this most blissful state. It's trying to squeeze itself through this cervix opening, and it's like this sense of restriction and depression, all the language of Saturn, right? Squeezing, reduction, like all of a sudden this vastness is now like this small. So it's contraction literal, the mother, pushing the baby out, but also the world is all of a sudden contracted by tenfold, right? And there is that sense of there is no exit. That's a famous phrase that is used in this Grof and Tarnas in this, when they talk about this particular model, and that sense of suffocation, and it's like, am I gonna die? And then as he moves through the canal, it's still pretty tight, and that's Pluto stage, which is basically a fight death and life, living or dying, like are we going to survive? And literally sometimes, tragically and sadly, babies do not survive, but that's certainly archetypally there is that battle of death and life. And then when we actually are born is Uranus and its liberation. That's the archetype of actual birth, when we're outside of the mother's body womb, right? But so just that's a brief kind of overview of that perinatal matrices or matrix by Grof, Stanislav Grof. So you can Google it and find out more if you're interested. But what I wanted to illustrate here in terms of the existential loneliness, just think of that like, so our birth, literal birth, the moment that we become the body, as in we are aware of ourselves as the body, is the moment that the Saturn enters as an archetypal stage, because it's the moment that this body, that up until the point while we're in the womb in this amniotic fluid, it's just all, there's no boundary. We just feel like the fluid ourselves. We are just, there's nothing pushing against us to make us aware that there is a boundary to us, right? Until the moment we come out, we start to come out, and that's Saturn. It's like all of a sudden we are just aware of every single bone in our body, every cell, because it's being squashed and being felt and being pressed and all that stuff. So what's happened is that this exile, this extraction from the connection, the ultimate connection to the source, to the Neptunian, right? To the mother, which is the source and metaphorically the source of all of us, this one spark of life that, that will be in a couple of weeks, I think, or maybe next week. No, a couple of weeks on how my cosmology, my own personal cosmology. So this sense of aloneness, so we're just left. We've just been thrown out of this Eden, and there's nothing other than this, like a chamber of darkness and pressure and profound discomfort and pain. So there is grief as well, even though I don't know if we physically are. There is grief. There is grief in terms of memory. When we're in Saturn, we remember the exile, and also how painful it was, and how sudden, and how unforgiving, and how unapologetic and uncompromising it was. Not knowing that that's the only way we could have actually survived and incarnated, but it's like, we don't want to incarnate. Who wants to incarnate from that blissful state? So if you think of that in terms of Saturn and in Pisces, like what Saturn and Pisces people are so profoundly and acutely aware of is this particular conundrum of human existence. It's like, why bother? Like, why would we bother to come out when it was so blissful and it was so painful to come out? And yet we are out. So we got to make do with it, right? So, but it's the loneliness of knowing that the loneliness is the knowing that connection that we had in the womb, metaphorically speaking, connection to the divine, to the source, right, is gone. Well, we think well, it is. In some way it has been so like muffled by the mass of our bodies and the skin and flesh and blood and all the rest of the physicality, right? That literally many of us, me included, are not necessarily in like regular connection to the source. But as humans, right? And you can see why, because the cut is so like, that's it. There's no more Neptune. Unless you are Saturn in Pisces. So Saturn in Pisces has this wonderful, and every single Saturn in Pisces I know, and I know one friend comes to mind, who's very much not into astrology, kind of like, you wouldn't say she's a mystic even, in the sort of way that maybe I would use it or you would use it, but she is a poet. She's a poet, and she's like crazy about animals and nature. I mean, she's a Virgo with Pluto in Virgo and all that, but that aside, so Saturn is opposite her sun. But my point is, her devotion to nature is her spirituality. She wouldn't call it that. She probably wouldn't, because she would be like, oh, spirituality. She's all very, skeptical and cynical, maybe even in some ways. But Saturn in Pisces will not let you get off the hook. It will find a way to connect you with source, even if you don't call it source. So my point is, where I don't have that, I mean, I don't, I'm Saturn in Taurus. Anyway, my point is, not all of us do, but Saturn in Pisces, even in spite themselves, depending on the rest of the chart, right? And I think nowadays, not nowadays, but the younger generation who are having a first Saturn return, which are mostly, I think, they are Pluto in Scorpio, all of them, are far more attuned to the spirituality, being in Scorpio, another water sign and all that. So they have less of a problem, or maybe more of a problem, because they're far more open to the vastness of the void. And the Saturn there goes, look how big it is, because I can give it to you. You can actually see it now. You can see there is no end. There is maybe the beginning, but there's no end, or whatever. You can actually see it because it's Saturn, right? And so, to all of you Saturn in Pisces, and to all of us currently that are maybe struggling with this transit, remember the poet. Remember the poet that actually crafts, that understands that it's never going to be a perfect poem that is meant to correspondingly, meaningfully translate some Neptunian, Piscean experience that the poet had. But that's okay. Like that is the reality of that marriage of Saturn and Neptune, or Saturn and Pisces. And it's impossible if you think of that birth, the moment you're born. That's the beauty of incarnation. So your knowledge of the Piscean realm of your experience that you're trying to put into form might be dissatisfied with the form, even if subtly, even if slightly. But how many times you, as the poet, have adored and loved another poem, another artwork, another piece of music, another piece of, painting or whatever, film, book, whatever, right? Have loved and felt so deeply moved. And that's all that you can do and you can experience. And it's the only criteria that you have done justice and you have done right by your Saturn in Pisces, to have created and given a beautiful form. However much there is a gap between the vision and the Neptunian piece and that form, the form is still beautiful. And in fact, without that form, that vision would be unrelatable, untranslatable, unconnectable. And the last point I want to make is that Saturn in Pisces is the most beautiful paradox, in the sense that helplessness, overwhelm, lostness become protection, become safety containers. Saturn in Pisces is the only Saturn that actually it's beneficial for the native to escape, to use fantasy in whatever form that is to you as an escape form, because that is where you meet your Saturn. And that gives you a sense of stability, a sense of groundedness, and sense of like a safety, like a protection. Like Saturn is is something that you cloak yourself around. It's the walls you build around yourself. So there's no point of building purely Saturnian walls in Pisces, because Pisces is the opposite of that. So you have to kind of find, the two of any, or three of any, or whatever, will always find a way to work together. Planets, archetypes, right? They may just not look, they may look very different. They're required to act very differently than they would in the most domicile placement. And that's just fact, right? It's nothing, nothing to worry about and nothing to stress about, because it's a fact, right? And so what Saturn does gives you sense of comfort the moment you will feel Pisceanly helpless, Pisceanly lost. And it's actually comforting. It's a form of structure, a psychic structure or psychological structure, emotional structure that you find you can rely on. You can rely on in the sense of lean on is probably a better word. Lean on and rest on. So in other words, Saturn in Pisces doesn't run away from these yucky, just the kind of feelings that are making us feel small. Saturn in Pisces feels in integrity when it feels humbled, when it feels small, when it doesn't feel grandiose and important and authoritative, all the kind of traditional and typical Saturnian themes and phrases and keywords. But it actually feels when it feels wobbly, when it feels misty, when it feels emotional, when it feels it gives, so it's like a container that gives depth and stability to your experience of Neptune or Pisces, since it's Saturn in Pisces. Saturn in Pisces knows that there is that, knows about Pisces, knows about Neptune, knows about that truth, the ultimate truth that we are all seeking. Saturn in Pisces knows of it, and he knows how small and insignificant in so many ways we are, and our existence in a way it is, and so it's plagued potentially by this search for meaning. Like, so what's the point of living then, if like there is this ultimate thing that I'm from and I ultimately want to return to, which is we all do. All we do is just to return to that source, to that sense of blissful, unconditional love, let's call it. But since I don't know how to get there, until I do, what do I do? This is just, this 3D world is so unlike that world. And so what's the point? How am I going to feel? How am I going to be okay with this? Why should I be okay with this, right? And so if you're having a first Saturn return, these might be really the questions you are grappling with. But trust me, and I speak from knowing a couple of people who are Saturn in Pisces second Saturn return, and I can see, although I'm not, but anyway, how this changes in time. It will change. You will arrive to this wisdom that there is beauty in all that fragility of life and fragility of form. I mean, form is perishable, where Neptune is forever, infinite, as in Pisces, both, right? Where Saturn and form, including our bodies, obviously, and that's what we are struggling with, that sense that it's perishable. But there is beauty and poignancy, and this is where the poet comes in. So you are wired, you are created to be the poet in the way you look at life, and maybe actually be a poet or some kind of artist. But certainly the way you look at life will be poetical if it's not already. And you might be still struggling because that's not exactly how you wanted it to be, when you were younger or whatever. So if you're either at your first Saturn return or just had it recently, you might still be like, I want to be successful in ways that, most people are or whatever, right? I don't know. But as you get older, you get wiser. And this is definitely the wisdom you're arriving at. And that is that to live poetically is Saturn in Pisces. And that means to just cherish life and see it as most beautiful in all its frailty, in all its impermanence, it's in all its imperfection. Poem, right? That's not perfect. And to find comfort in that. And that's the medicine of Saturn and Saturn in Pisces. But Saturn, the medicine of Saturn is comfort. Because what gives us comfort? Like just on day-to-day basis, a blanket, a duvet, a bowl of soup, matter, physical matter, a hug, another human being to feel, physically connected to, like touch-wise, right? That is Saturn. That's Saturn. So when you live poetically and approach your life and everything that happens in it, all the choices that you make, all the realities that are, unfolding for you in your life, and if you look at that as a poet would, a material for giving beauty to that form, or giving beauty to an experience, then you will find the deepest sense of comfort and belonging. Pisces, right? Belonging to the universe, because you have given form to the universe. The way it's chaos, it's indiscriminate dishing out of all kinds of Neptunian good and bad stuff, right? Floods and ecstasies and drugs and forever loves and romances and all of that, right? You will take comfort in being the one that is living that and giving it form.